From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, big fella. What a big 24 hours we have here at Sky News. As Chris just said, he's back tomorrow night, half an hour later than he normally start because of the Sherry Markson doco. Sherry joins us later in this show to give you an idea of what you can expect. Put it all together, good couple of hours of telly tomorrow night, but we'll do our best to make sure that the entree is worth the savouring here tonight. Now, isn't it amazing that when a group of an ethnic minority are called by a sitting politician people who are invaders, but more importantly, this politician is willing to stand next to people holding up signs that effectively suggest that this ethnic minority should be cleansed from the planet, that there may be some outrage in the media, even the people who are favourable to that politician. Well, of course, there's none of that. Yet members of the Jewish community in Sydney today, they went to the office of Mehreen Faruqi, Greens Senator representing New South Wales. They stood there and brought trash cans with them. On those trash cans it says, "Is this where the Jews should go?" They decided to protest out the front of her office after we showed you last night the image that came from Friday and the school strike for Palestine. Now, we have decided to blur the images of the kids. I'm sorry I didn't do that last night, but we certainly are doing it from now on. But as you can see, one of the kids that is standing next to Mehreen Faruqi is "Keep the world clean." Image, Jews going into the garbage. Put simply, get rid of them. Gone. Now, Mehreen Faruqi did not pose accidentally for this photo. This was not a photo that happened in the middle of the protest. It happened on the side of the protest. It was a posed photo. Now, she would have known what was around her, but at the very least, after the photo was taken, she would have known what the image to her left, your right, says. If she didn't upload the photo, then a member of her staff would have known what that image was, about what it meant, and about why even the most pro-Palestine person in the Australian Parliament would not want to identify with the sentiment to keep the world clean, Jews in the bin. But that ended up going out on Mehreen Faruqi's social media. Now, if she did it, it's a disgrace. If her staff did it, it's a disgrace. It was only after it was pointed out, after the photo was taken, after it was posted, that it was offensive and thus it was removed. Now, there has been some reaction to this today, but it's only when this organisation has actually asked members of the opposition.
Where was the Prime Minister condemning Green Senator Mehreen Faruqi recently for her despicable post on social media? The Prime Minister still, within reason, wants to have it both ways.
Mehreen Faruqi just last week was shown alongside at the student protest, someone throwing, a picture of the state of Israel being thrown into the garbage bin. I presume that can only mean it's calling for the abolition of the state of Israel.
There's that image, is what you're talking about. It was widely publicised. She removed it, I think, after posting it on Twitter.
Well, I'm glad she did.
Do you view that actually explicitly as anti-Semitism?
I think if you were calling for the destruction of a member state of the United Nations, yes, I consider that to be anti-Semitism.
This is a disgracefully irresponsible and dangerous thing for them to do. To pose for this photo, to post this photo, to realise after people pointed out what was in there, delete it but not apologise for it, reflects very poorly on Mehreen Faruqi, reflects very poorly on the Greens, who of course were fanning the flames of these protests to begin with, and it's totally unsurprising we've seen acts of anti-Semitism at them. So they should hang their heads in shame and they should deal with this themselves.
What about that bit in the middle when Dave Sharma brings it up in the middle of a conversation on Radio National? The host, is that really an example of anti-Semitism? Show the image again. The image is of a person holding up a sign saying, "Keep the world clean, Jews in the bin." Now, let's supplement the word Jews with any other racial group. Let's supplement it with any other sexual group. Let's supplement it with any other gender group. What would the reaction of people be if it was a far-right politician who was standing in front of such an image? Well, people's heads would explode. But, of course, what has been the collective response of the establishment, who normally would go nuts about something like this? Well, of course, tumbleweeds, nothing, 4/5, bugger all. In fact, you have to send a search party out to try to find this story anywhere else in the media apart from here and The Australian. Now, that says a lot about what behaviour is acceptable and not in our public discourse. It also shows us just how fake much of the outrage is in our communities when they blow up about the politicians that they don't like standing in front of the signs that they don't control. But again, where was the questioning today of Adam Bandt? Of course, none to be seen. Where was the questioning of Penny Wong today in the Senate, our Foreign Affairs Minister, the person who is the leader of the chamber in which Faruqi sits? Of course, nothing. The Prime Minister trying to keep his head down after the polls went deeply south for him? Well, nothing from him today. Now, remember, all of these people could decide to put out a statement if they want. They could put themselves maybe even in a friendly media environment to be asked the question. But the fact that nobody's asking the question, none of them are offering up condemnation, tells you what they are willing to let slide versus what they are willing to turn into a matter of principle. The overall Canberra media, as I said, they could have frontlined this today as something that needed to be dealt with, but of course, nothing. Nothing to be seen here. Look the other way. Why? And in fact, even in little read but influential in parts of the Australian media, the lefty website Crikey, the suggestion is that the Greens, and particularly their position when it comes to the Israel and Hamas war, may well end up becoming electoral beneficiaries of their stance on this, or their stance when it comes to not introducing new laws for the people who have been released from detention after the High Court. Now, again, I repeat, you think about the stuff that has been turned into scandal over the years. Remember when Tony Abbott sunk a yard glass? Oh my goodness me, toxic masculinity. When Tony Abbott stood in front of the sign "Ditch the Witch," which was pulled behind him after he started talking, yet still he was responsible for it. They wrote PhDs about this. But of course, nothing to be seen here, no such outrage. When Fraser Anning associated himself with unpleasant characters, of course, the senator was effectively deplatformed and never spoken of again. Mehreen Faruqi, nothing has happened. Which again, I repeat, says the next time one of these things happens on the centre-right and you see them all lose their collective brain about it, unless they're willing to lose it over this, well then they don't really mean it when inevitably these things happen into the future. But you can't think of anything more egregious than an elected member of an Australian Parliament standing in front of a sign that she posed for a photo with. It wasn't an accident, wasn't a moment in time, it was a posed photo. The posed photo says, "Clean up the world, Jews in the bin." Unbelievable, the lack of reaction to it, but are you surprised? From the people who today are still sucking their thumbs after the Australian people sent a message via news poll. And we all know why they have done so. There are multifacets of the Albanese government where people who are good performers, i.e. have been able to criticise the previous government in the lead up to the last election, to be able to blame the previous government for the whole first 18 months of everything they were responsible for in this new government. But the reality is that the skills of opposition don't always transfer into government. And now, halfway through their first term, the constant blaming of the other guys is wearing thin. Let me give you a few examples about why the Australian public has turned, at least this month in the news poll, and for the past couple of months in the Morgan poll, on the government. Number one, clueless Claire O'Neill, the Home Affairs Minister who could not have had a worse response than the response that she has had after the High Court made its decision to get rid of indefinite detention legislation, which means the worst people who should not be amongst us have been sent back into the community. Now, she has been caught lying multiple times. And if she hasn't been caught lying multiple times, she has been exposed as being clueless multiple times. Pick which one you believe. The Home Affairs Minister, Claire O'Neill, of course, said this after the High Court, the best part of 3 weeks ago, opened the doors to some of the worst people that have ever been in the country to return to our community.
We were advised that it was likely that the Commonwealth would win the case, that is, allow us to do what we wanted to do, which is keep these people in detention.
We were surprised by the decision. We thought we would win. But then, as the government tried to put it back inside the horse to pretend that, well, they were right across all of this, you had her number 2 minister, the Immigration Minister, Andrew Giles, say this in the Parliament, that they always knew it might be coming.
What I can say, though, is that the Department of Home Affairs is and has been engaging closely with state and territory enforcement agencies and proactively sharing information. Starting well before the decision in the current case was handed down.
Then there's the reporting from our friend Andrew Clennell today in Afternoon Agenda. Check it out each and every afternoon, where he has exposed that, again, if Claire O'Neill was certain that they were going to win, why was her department trying to get rid of the bloke who was taking his case to the High Court? They tried to offload him to the United States, and the dates match up before the court case was resolved.
The High Court decision's November 8, but this is September 1st. It's an email from David Gavin from the Department of Home Affairs that goes to several officials and says in relation to this case, NZYQ's case, quote, "The Minister for Home Affairs views this case with the utmost importance and wishes all avenues, including difficult ones, progressed." A month later, Anthony Albanese has just arrived in Washington for the state dinner, and a bureaucrat's emailing saying this. This is the Acting Assistant Secretary for the Department of Home Affairs, Noel Kerr, interrupts his Sunday night to say, "Hi, hope the PM's visit is going well. Appreciate another update on whether the US has responded to you by close of business on Monday."
So they knew the stakes, they knew the problem. One minister says we were prepared for it, another one says we weren't. And of course, again, desperate to try to find a way through all of this, the clueless Home Affairs Minister, clueless Claire O'Neill, has turned around and said that, of course, all of this was law that had been around for 20 years, which means it was there when Anthony Albanese was Prime Minister, when Scott Morrison was Prime Minister, when Malcolm Turnbull, Tony Abbott, Rudd, Gillard, Rudd and Howard were all in power.
We knew that there was a High Court action on foot. We knew that it was 20 years of legal precedent, and we were advised that it was likely that the Commonwealth would win the case, that is, allow us to do what we wanted to do, which is keep these people in detention.
But surprise, surprise, clueless Claire O'Neill now turns around and says that the laws that they're currently trying to introduce into the Parliament are all about fixing Peter Dutton's mess. Because remember when Peter Dutton was a minister in the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd, and he was the immigration minister in the Howard years? Oh, that's right. That wasn't true.
Peter Dutton created a set of laws that was unconstitutional, and his whole framework was thrown out of the High Court as of a High Court decision earlier this month. It is now for Labor to clean up his mess, and we're going to start that work today in the Parliament.
Seriously, people at one point said she could be a future leader and therefore a future Prime Minister. Well, she's now starting to move towards the back of the pack. She's still in front of people like Linda Burney, but she is sliding down the scales because she can't be trusted. She can't be trusted with what's really going on. Instead, she tries to find the political fix each and every day. And even though it contradicts what she said yesterday, and it will be contradicted by what she says tomorrow, she comes out and speaks about it with certainty and conviction, assuming that everyone is stupid and hasn't actually followed all of this along. And again, when all else fails, blame Dutton. Dutton responsible for a law that had been in place for 20 years? He was, of course, an immigration minister under Scott Morrison as Prime Minister. But that's when it started. Then he was the Home Affairs Minister under Malcolm Turnbull. The legislation that the High Court dealt with, as the Minister has said multiple times, was 20 years old. So good luck pushing that one. And then there's this garbage, which was served up again by her number two, Andrew Giles, in Parliament today.
For all of us on this side of the House, we take community safety very, very, very seriously. In fact, it is our utmost priority. As can be demonstrated by the behaviour of those opposite. The behaviour of those opposite who never miss an opportunity to divide or deflect. Unlike them, Speaker, we are leaving no stone unturned in our efforts to protect the community.
Isn't it impressive to see a wet lettuce leaf trying to become a steel glove? No chance. Well, of course, if security was the number one priority, well, could he explain why, on his watch, he and his department did not actually issue visas to many of the people when they were first leaving detention, the best part of, 3 weeks ago? Or when they were released from detention, like they were in Perth, they were put into a hotel where there was no members of Border Force, no members of the police service, and not even private security guards. Another reason why Labor is suffering in the polls right now. The Treasurer, Grim Jim Chalmers, the man who says, yeah, he's a little bit loose when he was on the cans around Parliament. Nobody will ever ask exactly what. Might just keep asking that question until he gives us an answer. But of course, he is the man who is ultimately in a position to do something about cost of living, something that this government talks the talk but does not walk the walk. Here he was again in Parliament today.
Cost of living pressures are the biggest concern around the kitchen tables of this country, and they are the biggest focus of the Cabinet table here in Canberra as well. We understand Australians are doing it tough.
Now, you know that's not true, I know that's not true, and even a crazy cat lady from Tasmania knows it's not true.
No, there's a no-win here. It's not like they go in and do these policies at half pace and go, well, that'll do, we've given the consumers some money, but you know what? The people on top, they just put their prices up, mate. That's common sense. That's how businesses work. And people keep saying to me, it's like, well, where's the government gone? It lost out on the voice, and it's like sitting in a corner, has no idea, doesn't know what to do from here on in. That's what it looks like.
And then there's the whoppers that get told, the little half-truths, the little sleight of hand, the little games that get played, hoping that you won't pay attention. Now, again, most people don't watch Question Time. For my sins, I do, so I can report back to you about the tactics that they are starting to play here to try to change the conversation. There was this absolute whopper from the Treasurer today suggesting that his government's policies to deal with cost of living were able to save the inflation rate from going up by an extra 0.5%. Well, who cares when it's currently more than 5%? Have a listen to what he has to say about power bills. Remember, the ones that were supposed to go down by $275?
Now, Mr Speaker, without our energy plan, electricity would have gone up 18.6%, not 4.2%.
Only problem is, where's he getting his numbers? Because the inflation numbers are calculated quarterly, but they're also available to us month on month. Now, he was talking there about a 4% increase in power bills. It's actually 18%. He was claiming credit for it not being 18.6%. Instead, he said it's 4%. Reality is it is at 18%. And while I get to Chris Bowen in a moment, those numbers are going to remain high because of the billions, nay, trillions of dollars that are needed to transition from the old grid to the new grid, because that's what Twitter and Q&A demands. Yet, of course, this is the bloke who is in a position to be able to do something about cost of living relief today, and that is to cut petrol taxes. As you know, 25 cents cut for 6 months would cost $3 billion. And that would all come out of a federal budget surplus that is more than $20 billion. But as the Prime Minister proved, again, later in Question Time, they don't want to touch the surplus because they want to use it to make political points like this.
Under us, the first budget surplus in 15 years. Yeah. Something unrecognisable for those opposite who left a $78 billion deficit. We've got a $22 billion surplus.
Reason number 3. Chris Bowen. Blackout Bowen because, of course, we constantly get told that energy supply is going to be a problem. The Bureau of Meteorology, the BOM, of course, has said that because it's going to be particularly hot, that means there's going to be less wind. Less wind means less power, and that means it's going to be an unreliable grid. Well, as you know, last week, Chris Bowen came up with an idea to basically NBN renewable energy, which is for the federal government to underwrite a whole collection of brand new infrastructure. Now, companies have to bid for it. The government will then choose the lowest price, which will, of course, inevitably blow out because any government announcing anything always ends up costing us about twice as much as the original press release says. But all of it is going to be off budget, which means we'll never know exactly how much money that's going to cost. But as the Financial Review told us in the past couple of days, the fear is this could be about tens of billions of dollars. All of it, which will be hidden somewhere and we'll never know. But don't make any mistake. Chris Bowen's plan to achieve what he wants to achieve, which is 80+% renewables, is based off more taxpayer dollars going into this infrastructure. So you pay for it as a taxpayer and you pay for it as a customer. And how do we know that it's tens of billions of dollars? Because when he appeared with the New South Wales Energy Minister, Penny Sharp, last week, he was announcing a new project that would produce 1 gigawatt of power. That's 1,000 megawatts of power. The cost, $1.8 billion. Renewable energy websites, which praised Chris Bowen for coming up with this new sleight of hand where the government's going to be dumping tens of billions of dollars in, says that his dream is to get to 32 gigawatts of extra power. So do your sums. 32 gigawatts at the best price of what, 1.8 billion? $57.6 billion. That's how much money this bloke looks like he is going to be able to push off books and never be held accountable for. And just as I predicted when we told you about this last week, and sadly I was correct on this, which is that one of the ways he's going to hide you ever knowing how much money the Australian taxpayer is putting into these projects, whether they work or not, is to firstly put them off budget, which means the numbers are never published. And even if there was some way of being able to get them published, the government would be able to hide behind the contracts that they write with the private companies that would go and build the infrastructure with the taxpayers' dollars. All of this is done under the practice of being commercial in confidence, which means you never get to see the contracts, you never get to see the terms, you never get to see the money. And even if you asked for it, you'd get back documents that look like this. And just to give you an idea of how Chris Bowen thinks he's pulled off a master plan of almost 60 billion extra taxpayers' dollars with no accountability, guess which term he used over and over again today in question time.
It is quite common practice in governments of all levels when you are conducting an auction to say that it is commercial in confidence. Commercial in confidence. Commercial in confidence. Commercial in confidence.
But of course, the biggest reason is the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister himself, his lack of leadership, his want to put the country through what became deeply divisive in that referendum, $450 million up against the wall. But this is the government that will spend hundreds of millions of dollars on soft diplomacy and also scenarios where, as I've just shown you, they'll spend tens of billions of dollars to fix the political problem. Well, the Prime Minister thought he had got away with his lack of answers about what happened to Australian Navy clearance divers when they were trying to get fishing nets off the back of HMAS Toowoomba. It was in the Japanese Sea, but the Chinese decided to fire sonar, which ended up injuring one of the sailors, and they had to come up to the surface. As you know, all of this happened while Albo was running up for photo ops with President Xi, the man responsible for his military, when they were meeting in the United States just a couple of weeks ago. When the Prime Minister was caught out about the timings of all of this because it was revealed after he was flying back on Airbus Albo, or was it Toto 1, back to Australia during one of his many infrequent visits to this country, where of course it was revealed that all of this took place. So we knew what happened before APEC, but the public wasn't told until after. So the question was, did you raise it with the boss of China when you were at APEC? In a hastily arranged interview, this was the Prime Minister not answering.
Well, we've raised it very clearly through all of the normal channels. But I can assure you that we raised these issues in the appropriate way.
Of course, that's garbage. The appropriate way, what? They wrote on a piece of paper and sent it to a fax that they hoped wasn't connected anymore? Leader to leader, this should have been a conversation, and out of pride for our Defence Force and accountability for China injuring one of our Defence Force members, regardless of whether China likes it or not, the Prime Minister should have fronted the boss of China and said, hey, knock that stuff off, and he should have been able to say so clearly. But surprise, surprise, he didn't. He was asked the direct question today by Peter Dutton.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. On the 14th of November, Royal Australian Navy divers from HMAS Toowoomba were deliberately injured by sonar pulses fired from a Chinese Navy destroyer. The following day, the Prime Minister travelled to San Francisco where he met with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Did the Prime Minister personally raise this serious issue with President Xi?
The Prime Minister's response was an even bigger word salad than the one that he served up to Kieran Gilbert last week, and then when he ran out of puff, he just sat down and didn't answer anymore.
What we won't be doing is taking lectures on how to build diplomatic relations with those opposite, who could not get a phone call returned for the entire term of the last government.
Order.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, because those opposite think that foreign relations are simple. Threats of shirt fronting, leaking of private text messages, leaking of private conversations, which meant that there was no possibility of getting outcomes. The fact is that we now have a path forward for wine exports. We say we say as well that we'll cooperate with China where we can, we'll disagree where we must.
For Gippsland.
And I note the HMAS Toowoomba then travelled to the Taiwan Straits and is currently involved in exercises with the Philippines Navy as a direct result of the deal that I signed with President Marcos just a couple of months ago.
Yeah. Clear, right? A yes-no question that he turns into all of that ramble. So, as you have heard multiple times today, but you saw with us last night in real time, that news poll produced quite the result. 50-50 on two-party preferred and on primary vote. Let's go back and compare from the start of the year to the end of the political year. The LNP is at 38%, and they could win an election. They wouldn't want to go much lower than that, but they could win an election on 38% primary. That's very similar to where Morrison was going into 2019. The ALP is now lower than where it was at the last election and 7 points below where it was at the start of the year. The Greens, sadly, are up compared to where we were at the start of the year. Others, from the Independents all the way through to Palmer United, are up at 3%, and One Nation remains solid at 6%. But as for the approval and disapproval of Anthony Albanese, this is one hell of a turnaround. Not to mention honeymoon over, not to mention sleeping on the couch, the bloke's in serious trouble. His approval rate has fallen 17% since the start of the year. His disapproval is now more than half of the country and is up by 20%. And then the final shoe dropped today. The final shoe dropped about what this government really wants to do going into the next federal election. Now, this could seem very dry as a subject, but this literally is the rules under which our democracy functions. But there's a chance this might be the first time you've heard about it, despite the entire political media complex being employed to talk about the rules of the game. Today, a final report was released by a joint committee of the Federal Election and Other Matters Committee. The Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters. They released their report today. It is all to do with the rules under which we have our elections and how many people are set to be elected to the House and the Senate every 3 years. Now, previously, they have talked about things like spending caps, where parties would be limited on how much money they would spend. That's bad news for the Teals, it's bad news for Clive Palmer. But because the unions would be exempt, it would mean that the unions can spend $1 and the Labor Party can spend $1, effectively meaning they have at least a 2-to-1 advantage over everyone else on the ballot paper at each and every election. Here are their recommendations. We'll debate them a little later tonight. Recommendation 1. The committee recommends that the government consider asking the committee to inquire into increasing the size of the House of Representatives. So they are suggesting there should be more politicians, not less. More electorates for more spending, more taxpayers' money that goes into the party political coffers. Recommendation 2. The committee recommends the representation of the territories be increased from 2 to 4 seats, effectively doubling the amount of left-wing members that will be in the parliament from the ACT, doubling the situation where it could get the Greens into the parliament in the Northern Territory. Now, this would mean that there is basically a permanent anti-conservative bloc that will end up always knocking back what a potential Conservative government wanted to achieve. Recommendation number 3. This is how they are planning to change the rules of Australian democracy before our very eyes. The committee recommends that the Electoral Act be amended so you can enrol to vote on the day of an election. On the day. Now, there's nothing to say that you can't enrol a couple of times, vote a couple of times, cop a fine, but guess what? Your votes will still count. Recommendation 13. The committee recommends that charities be exempt from the donation caps. But of course, many listed charities act politically, particularly ones that are focused on things like the environment in the lead up to elections. So there'd be a cap on a donation to a political party, but not to somebody that would be acting like a political party. Recommendation 15. The committee recommends that, contingent on the Australian government introducing truth in political advertising laws, that the media blackout disappears. So this means you'll have TV and radio ads blasting all the way to election day. And truth in politics, well, you'd hope that they introduce that, but then Labor wouldn't be able to pretend that the coalition was about to privatise Medicare. Watch this space. Because most likely, the Greens thinking they can pick up extra seats in the ACT or the Northern Territory, and David Pocock with Labor will pass this. The donation reform probably will be passed by the coalition because they think it will nobble the Teals. But in the end, there'll be a more left-wing Senate and there'll be a 2-to-1 financial advantage to the Labor Party. Watch this space. Plenty to talk about. Let's get underway. The debate begins straight after this break. We're also going to have a chat to Sharry Markson. We've got a lot to get to. From these changes, Mehreen Faruqi and a whole lot more. Thanks for watching. How's this for a group of people that we're going to hang out with on a Monday night? None other than Charlie's favourite angel, none other than Carolyn Marcus here. I love the hairstyle. If only I could...
She's Miss America.
God love you. Of course, she is, of course, a very accomplished journalist and a good person joining us here at Sky News. Well, he fashions his hair in the way that he sets his watch, the same way every day. None other than the great Senator Matt Canavan, of course, joining us.
I got a haircut recently. I got a haircut.
You look good. And the man who needs one shortly on that Mo, but he's got a few more days to raise a little bit more money, is Nicholas Rees, Deputy Lord Mayor of Melbourne. So let's start with you first, Senator, where we learned today from the bosses of one of the supermarkets that part of the aggro in and around cost of living right now is that people are blowing up at the people that are serving them in the shops. Now, for obvious reasons, knock that garbage off, right? That person is clearly not responsible for what's being charged here, but it gives us an indication about just how tightly wound people are at the moment. The Woolly CEO says that while the vast majority of customers do the right thing, we're seeing an unacceptable rise in team abuse. No excuse, blah, blah, blah. Your thoughts?
Well, you're absolutely right, Paul. It's a low act to take your frustrations out on a checkout chick or bloke or just somebody earning effectively minimum wage. It's not their fault what's going on in the shops, and they've got a tough enough job as it is. I mean, I would like to take the opportunity to share my 2 cents with the CEO of Woolworths, Brad Banducci. I mean, if he's that concerned with the cost of living for Australians, why the hell is he charging us 25 cents for these rubbish paper bags that break every time you put a milk carton in them? I mean, why can't we have the plastic bags in? Why can't we have them for free? We used to get them for free. And then they said they wanted to protect the environment and go to plastic and charge, they charge us 10 cents, I think. And now they're charging us 25 cents for a rubbish paper bag. I mean, what are the margins on these? How much do you reckon these bags are costing them to make and get? They are making a fortune out of us. They break more regularly than they can't reuse the things. They've got to be worse for the environment. Someone told me today, my mum, she's probably watching actually at the moment, my mum told me that when they brought in plastic bags, Paul, g'day mum, when they brought in plastic bags, mum told me that they made a big song and dance about how they were saving the trees. Not saving the environment. And now they're going back to paper and they're charging us double for it. So get rid of those stupid fees and charges on our bags. We used to get them for free and now they're fleecing.
Yeah, but again, Caroline, it all speaks back to where we were at the start of the show, which is the cost of living, right? Take your pick about why Newspoll is where it is, and that's just because it's where it is now doesn't mean it'll be there in a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. But right now, one of the stings in the tail is cost of living, and the Treasurer today pretending we deserve credit because we've saved you 0.5%, and then just lying about things like energy prices. Again, normal people don't pay attention to what happens in question time every day, but it does give us an insight into how delusional the government can actually be.
Well, I think that it just speaks to the overall frustration of people, what we're seeing in supermarkets reportedly, that they feel that the government isn't doing enough to tackle this issue, that it's more focused or has been diverted by secondary issues like The Voice for so long, and nothing has really changed for them at home. But what I find most shocking about this today is that people are actually getting served by people in the supermarkets. Aren't we all using self-checkout at this point? I mean, if anyone is copping my wrath, it is that machine that is constantly telling me that there is an unexpected item in the baggage area. There is no unexpected item in the baggage area. I can't stand it.
Yeah, that's the list.
Look, obviously I'll do my shopping in my yoga pants as well from time to time. No, not at all. Look, I always try to go and see a human being because I want them to be kept in a job. But I think that the aggro that's around, it's a little insight into a bigger issue here. Now, Nicholas, the Newcastle protest that was the greatest day of civil disobedience when everyone was getting around in, their bamboo kayaks and obviously not. Like, literally, we all know the products here. Well, Adam Bandt gives us a chance to show the video of him. And doesn't this look like a bloke who's got core strength? Have a look.
The feeling here is just absolutely electric. Like, there's nothing like people power as a good antidepressant when, governments won't act, people will, and it feels great to be part of it.
This is the most pointless protest I can think of in Australia, Nicholas, because The coal moved out today. It was moving on Friday, it moved again today, and everyone felt good about themselves while getting around in petroleum-based craft for the weekend. What a waste of everyone's time.
So I'm not sure if that was Grant Kenny there out on the water in that protest or somebody else.
Yeah,
but,
he's definitely not the solo man.
As you know.
You've got the solo man's mo, though, and I like it.
Look, as you know, I support the transition away from coal, but I don't think it should be done through rule breaking or law breaking in the case of this particular protest. And look, the good news is that Australia is well on track in this regard. Government announced this week that we are well on track to meet our 42% reduction in emissions
Where's
by
the emissions
2030, and even better, we're going to hit an 82% from renewables. So unlike Matt, I don't think that coal is some holy rock which mankind must cling to forevermore. I believe in progress, and we will move beyond fossil fuels to a more technologically advanced renewable energy source that will power a nation. Will be a green superpower, renewable energy superpower. But I don't think the way to get there is by silly people in boats like we saw there.
The thing is, Matt, and I agree with you. The thing is, Matt, we saw Bill Shorten's policies repackaged by Albo going into this previous election, right? And now, thankfully, we're closer to the next one than we had been to the previous. But if they had taken the policy that has now become the policy, which is potentially, $60 billion worth of taxpayers' money that'll go into private arrangements with companies of which none of us will ever know any detail about, to actually achieve all of those things that they're about to go and wrap themselves when they go to a UN conference, the result may well have been different. If they had actually told us that to build all this stuff, your energy prices go up this month by the best part of 20% as opposed to down 275. But here's the test. We know where Newspoll is, but what about practical Australian voters? Because it feels like the government is going to set us in one direction with one result and an awful lot of cost. That cost that is hidden, what can be done for us to actually see what the cost of transition is?
Well, the government needs to be upfront with the Australian people, which they're not at the moment. I mean, the government's own acts in the past week, the Labor Party's own acts, simply destroy the arguments Nicholas just put to your viewers. He said that the government is on track for 82% renewables by 2030. Well, if that was the case, why do they just have to shovel something like $60 billion of your money out the door to foreign investors to build solar and wind factories across the country? I mean, if it was on track, why are they spending this money? Why are they putting at risk you and I's hardworking taxpayers' dollars to support foreign investment in solar and wind factories? It's absolutely absurd. It clearly wasn't on track. In fact, the Treasurer also said the same a few months ago. He said it wasn't on track. They're going to need a greater heavy hand to generate this. And what this shows, it goes to what Caroline said before, Paul, that the government is obsessed with things like a renewable energy target that have nothing to do with helping people pay their bills. I mean, how is giving $60 billion of your money to a foreign investor going to help me pay my power bill? It's clearly not, because the more we invest in renewable energy, the higher our prices go. It destroys our energy grid, totally destroys the consistency and reliability of it, and we all have to pay more for it. What is the government doing to help us?
Yeah, correct. If they put this one up, we know it would have been battered away. Instead, it's into the too hard basket, and in the spirit of transparency, you can't know commercial in confidence. Mehreen Faruqi, what does it say about the lack of reaction? Now, again, if a far-right politician had stood next to somebody in a posed photo with the best place to put, insert racial group, sexual group, gender, was in the bin, which means kill them, get rid of them, we know what the reaction would be. Nothing for Faruqi, though. Nothing.
Well, it just tells you, I guess, what most of the media class are focused on. Because look at the reaction that Tony Abbott got when he unwittingly stood in front of a sign that said "Ditch the Witch" about Julia Gillard, and the outcry over misogyny that spurred so many headlines and so many reports. And here is the deputy leader of the Greens standing next to a brazenly anti-Semitic sign, knowingly that it was anti-Semitic. She would have known that. She's no fool in this area. She knows exactly what she's doing. And she not only stood next to the person, she posted it to her personal social media. She knew what she was doing. She did delete it sometime later when there was some personal backlash on the page. But why hasn't there been any backlash from other members of the media, from other commentators outside Sky and News Corp.
Because this is the thing, they're trying to say, oh, it's just in that little hook, and then she's going to sit on one of those committees that'll investigate us later in the year and complain about this coverage and all the rest. Nicholas, again, as a bloke who is, let's say the friendly face of the left, you would understandably be as detested as everyone else by this, but at what point are the Greens unable to be dealt with, unable to get preferences? Because if they've got members of Parliament like that, I repeat, if it was in any other gender or any other race, we know the reaction.
Well, look, I agree that was a vile anti-Semitic sign. I felt like almost breathless when I saw it because it's so shocking. It's disgusting. But I will, and I'm not here to defend the Greens, but I will say that Senator Faruqi, upon having this pointed out, has unreservedly apologised, taken the post down, which just picking up on Caroline's point before about the Ditch the Witch, Pauline Hanson never apologised for participating in that rally with the Ditch the Witch, which by the way was attended by far-right groups back in 2011. I know because I was around at the time,
I know,
and there was the anti-Semitic League of Rights were participating there on that day
11 years
with
ago.
Tony Abbott and others, and they never apologised for that. They never apologised.
But the idea that Faruqi gets a free pass because she says sorry, but if it's any other politician, they're not allowed to say sorry. They held their feet to the fire because they took the photo, posted the photo. Guys, I'm out of time. Thank you. Do appreciate it. We'll talk again very, very soon. Enjoy your time all around the shop. Sherry Markson joins us next. Massive doco coming up tomorrow night. She's going to give you some big details. And I'm telling you, this is going to be big news around the world. She joins us straight after the break. Without doubt, the most important story of the 21st century is what happened in Wuhan. What happened in China when, of course, coronavirus got out of control. That's the kindest way of putting it. But you and I both know that the reality is that it started in China. The official story was it's all to do with caves and markets, but the reality is that the work that was going on in the Institute of Virology is the most likely cause of what has now killed millions of people around the world. Now, remember, China knew this was a problem because domestic flights were shut off. They didn't want it to spread around their own country, but they were more than happy to let international flights go, spreading it around the world. As you know, for the most obvious of reasons, some of the people with the most to lose are the ones in the positions of power to actually investigate what really happened in Wuhan, which is why they don't. So it comes to people who are well-informed, passionate and talented outsiders to tell us what really happened in Wuhan. My dear, beautiful friend and colleague, Sherry Markson, has literally written the stories, the book and a fantastic documentary. Tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, the next chapter of what really happened in Wuhan, and it's even wilder than anything you know thus far. Sherry is in the man cave. Hello, darling.
Paul, so good to be in the man cave with you.
Thank you. You know I traditionally hug, but everything would fall over here. Congratulations. Again, a spectacular piece of work. What we are seeing again in this chapter, and I want everyone to see it in the detail, all of it there tomorrow night, 8 o'clock here on Sky News, is that you are getting deeper and deeper into the who knew what and when people were starting to be directed away from what seemed to be fairly obvious. Let's start with, say, the Biden administration. Now, the Biden administration, he sets up a committee, go and have a look at what happened here. Well, when people start saying, yeah, it probably came from the lab, what happens next?
Yes, so Joe Biden ordered a 90-day probe to examine the origins of the virus when he was president in 2021. And what I've now been able to uncover is that his probe involved the censorship and the silencing of scientists in the intelligence community who believed and had evidence that COVID-19 was genetically engineered in a laboratory. Wow. Yet their findings never made it to the final assessment by that probe. 90% of their findings were deleted. And what we go into tomorrow night is that there was a serious conflict of interest among one of the people involved in that probe.
I had found out that apparently she was an outside advisor also to the World Health Organization. They are a political agency, they're a UN agency. It's just not appropriate to do work for a foreign power, and that would include the United Nations. She was, I believe, an advocate for zoonosis, but she was very involved in discrediting the information that we were trying to present to the Secretary of State. Clearly, from the get-go, even when the Trump administration was still in office, the DNI was pushing out this notion it was a natural phenomenon. It was only a natural phenomenon, where we now know that they had their own doubts.
Now, Sherry, what I find particularly interesting is that the United States has a particular form that they follow after major disasters. September 11, joint parliamentary inquiry, held in front of the public, full subpoena power, everything on the table and thousands of page reports produced, right? This started, of course, with the Warren Commission, the magic bullet, after JFK, and also January 6. We saw the same thing too. Subpoena power, get the documents, find all the rest of it. This has not happened with something that destroyed the Western world in terms of its economy, locking people in their houses. Do you think that the Biden administration was trying to get a conclusion that was favourable to China, or, more likely, was just not in line with where Trump was? Because Trump said it might be the lab, they had to find that it wasn't the lab.
I think there's been a clear lack of courage and conviction from our world leaders. And in fact, this issue, more than any other, exposes how weak our world leaders have become, that they can't even stand up to China and say, we do need a commission of inquiry, we do need an international investigation to find out what happened here, what sparked a pandemic that killed 7 million people. And Paul, it's not just about justice for those people, but it's about making sure another pandemic doesn't happen again.
Sherry, you are one of the most fearless people I've ever met. You're a credit to your family and to the organisation of what you do. Well done, mate. Congratulations. I know it's been a wild time over the past few weeks for you to also punch this out. Shows this lady can work. What really happened in Wuhan, the next chapter, before us tomorrow night, 8 o'clock here on Sky News. Sherry, I love you more than ever.
Thank you, as always, for the incredible support and all the love right back at you. Thank you.
Good on you, darling. All right, plenty more to say before we're done. The late debate in a couple of moments here on Sky News. Have you always wanted to be on Sky News? Here is your opportunity to join us on this side of the telly. We're looking for fired up people with lots of opinions on lots of issues. Please, there's a brand new show we're putting together and we need you, as in you. Yes, no, okay, the one over to the left. That one, you. Audience@skynews.com.au. Send us an email right now about why you'd like to join us on the air for a special show at Sky News. Audience@skynews.com.au. Let's fill out the joint right now. And speaking of, our next Our Town location, the last one of the year, is Port Lincoln in South Australia. Never been there, can't wait to get there, because apart from the beautiful scenery, the amazing people, yes, I'm getting in a boat and going a little bit offshore, and yes, they're feeding me to the sharks. I will be diving with the sharks. Let us see, in the season of the fat bearded man, whether this fat bearded man can make it through the experience of diving with sharks. Now, either I'll be hosting the Our Town show or we'll find somebody else who'll host it and they'll show my final days. But feel free to join us in the audience in Port Lincoln. It is not this Sunday, but it is next Sunday. If you would like to join us, please do so. Send us an email, ourtown@skynews.com.au. A couple of weeks in Port Lincoln on a Sunday night. That's our show. Now, again, don't forget, if you want to be part of what we're planning for next year here at Sky News, it is audience@skynews.com.au. If you want to join us for Our Town in Port Lincoln, it is ourtown@skynews.com.au. And if you'd just like to send me a hug, carry a pigeon, or just send one emotionally, I'll get it either way. Here's the late debate.